Hi folks, Jennifer Nelson here, founder of Scout Real Estate. Glad you're listening in. I created Pocket Hours podcast to elevate our game and help us all learn from the best. I have interviewed some of the top producers in our industry about best practices, among many other things. We also tackle industry issues and changes with great conversation from many of our leaders. And the best part is you get clock hours just for listening in. After you have listened to 3 episodes, just email info@scoutrealestate.com to answer a few easy questions for the interview, and you will receive your certificate. Meanwhile, enjoy listening and learning, and go out there and be the agent you would hire. Today is a very special day as I'm interviewing my friend and longtime colleague, Dawn Leverett, on the show. I asked Dawn to be on the show because Dawn has been diagnosed with a disease called MSA, multi-system atrophy. And I asked her to be on the show because she's been a longtime real estate agent. We talk a little bit about real estate, but the majority of the show, I wanted her to talk about what's been going on in her health and this diagnosis. And she is brave and vulnerable and generous with her time in agreeing to do that for all of us to listen and learn from. Because of this multi-system atrophy, one of the things that is happening in her body is her inability to speak as clearly as she used to. So she wanted me to let you all know that so that as you're listening, turn up the volume a little bit so you can hear her words more clearly. Also, for those of you that are able and willing, we'd love for you to go to the MSA Coalition and donate on behalf of getting the word out about this disease and hopefully finding a cure. I hope as you listen to this today that you hear the amazing themes that Dawn talks about: connection and gratitude in the midst of what she's facing in her life right now. Take heed to someone who is going through an amazing, difficult situation with her health and has been diagnosed with no cure and is still standing before you talking about relationships as key, living your life with that in mind instead of all the other things that easily distract us. Today, I am incredibly honored and privileged to have my friend and longtime comrade in the business of real estate, Dawn Leverett, on the show today. Dawn, thank you for being here.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. We are doing something different today on Pocket Hours. As you all know, listeners who have been listening for a while, we talk about real estate and best practices, and we have on all kinds of different people that are in our industry talking about their different things. But today, we're going to be talking with Dawn about her health and about this diagnosis that she's received. Dawn, your bravery and vulnerability to do this is not unnoticed. I just feel really appreciative for you to take the time to do this with us, given what's on your plate right now.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Maybe start us back to when you first had an inkling something was up. Do you want to start there? Is that the best spot?
Sure. I have
Okay.
a little doggie that I absolutely adore, and I used to walk him a couple of times a day. I noticed one time on our dog walks, I was just a little bit more lightheaded and moving slower. I always described it as I felt like I was walking through jello, just kind of slugging along. And I just sort of just was noticing this more and more, and that was strange to me, obviously. But that wasn't enough to really send me to the doctor. So what did it was in 2020, I was in Hawaii with my friends on a trip that I go with them on annually almost. We were doing the things we normally do. I was paddleboarding out in the ocean. And I just didn't have the strength. I just noticed that I didn't have the strength to do what I'd done just a year or two before. I paddleboarded a lot around here too, and I just couldn't do it. I spent the whole time worried about that instead of enjoying the ocean in Hawaii like I would normally be doing. That was enough to really tip me off and send me to the doctor when I got home. So I went in for my annual when I got home. and blood pressure was 80 over 50. That tipped them off. So that started a string of
Yeah.
ologists, I call it. I had lots of ologists, the cardiologist, the rheumatologist, the neurologist, all of them.
All the ologists. I love it. For those of you unfamiliar with blood pressure, normal reading would be what, Dawn?
120 over 80 is ideal.
Okay.
I was
Yeah.
running at about 80 over
They,
50.
so this is back in 2020. So you started in on the road with all the ologists, and are they finding anything? Are they coming back and saying, "Oh, we know what it is"?
No, I started off with the cardiologist and I went in for the stress test and all the things that they do with you. And I couldn't get my heart rate to the level that they were shooting for because my feet wouldn't turn over fast enough. So I couldn't move on their treadmill fast enough to get my heart rate up. So we had to stop that. So then they did a nuclear or chemically induced stress test where you walk on the treadmill and they give you some sort of medication and it elevates your heart rate to the point. So I got to the level that they wanted and nothing was wrong. So the stress test came out fine. I had on an EKG or ECG what is called a right bundle branch block, but in and of itself, that's not enough to really be that dangerous. So they weren't really worried about that. That was my few months with the cardiologist. Next was the rheumatologist, and so we went through all the tests looking for lupus, looking for rheumatoid arthritis, looking for all the autoimmune situations. And one thing I found interesting with that is I kept asking for a Lyme test to be tested for Lyme disease. It was really hard to get our system to test for that. They just kept saying, we don't have that here. All I was hearing was Lyme has some really interesting symptoms, but that's just a side note.
I want to go back just for a second because trying to have some humor throughout all this
Sure.
situation right now. I'm not surprised as a realtor, Dawn, that your stress test came back just fine because
True.
you have been under, we have all, we've lived this market year after year. So we're like, stress test? What do you mean? We know how to do that.
Yeah.
We live that way.
Stress. Gotcha. Got
Yeah.
it.
Cardiologist, rheumatologist, and
Then
then what else?
a hematologist, my blood was a little wonky, but that's not really a part of this. Went a round or two with the hematologist who I adored. By the way, that was my favorite doctor. Adorable gay man with two children and a husband. It was wonderful. Then I went to the neurologist, and that's where I stayed for a good while. In the winter of 2022, so 2 years later, I finally got a diagnosis of probable MSA. Went through all of the CAT scans, DAT scans, MRIs, all of it. Of course, I should back up. First thing they looked for was MS, of course, but that was not it. DAT scan kind of put the bow on the present and gave them what they needed to have to call it probable MSA.
Tell us what MSA stands for.
Stands for multiple system atrophy.
I don't know anything about it. And Dawn, I just want to say this out loud for the listeners. Neither did you.
No.
This is partly why you're on this show today, is to say there just isn't a lot of information about this disease. Let's try to inform our listeners. What is MSA?
Well, it's extremely rare, number one. I didn't know anything about it. Most people don't know anything about it. And most of the medical establishment doesn't know anything about it. So it's very, very rare. There are a few specialists around the country who deal with this, and luckily one of them is right here in Seattle. Thank goodness. Multiple system atrophy is exactly what it sounds like. Multiple systems are affected by this disease and they will shut down. The biggest thing being autonomic failure. So, all of the systems that are a part of the autonomic nervous system are things that happen normally that we don't even think about. Things like blood pressure control, temperature control of the body, bladder control, bowel control, balance, eventually breathing, speech, which is starting to be affected in my case, swallowing. All of those things will eventually be affected. So there's no known cause and no known cure for MSA. It's basically treating symptoms.
So, how does it differ from ALS?
It's similar to ALS, but it's a little bit different. ALS attacks the one part of the brain, and this attacks another part of the brain. This attacks the cerebellum. Well, in some cases.
Okay.
In my case, I have
Okay.
MSAC, standing for cerebellum. But it is
Okay.
very much like
Okay.
ALS in that things shut down.
So, Dawn, this is a hard question, but I want you to go back to that day that you realized that you have this and that they're saying there's no cure.
It was an interesting day. It was done over Zoom, and luckily I had friends
Wow.
friends in the room who were with me to support me through that. I had already had the DAT scan and already saw the results of that, so I knew that there was something Parkinsonian going on because that's what DAT scans are for. The neurologist presented me with, "This is what I think it is, and I'm gonna send you upstairs to the movement clinic," they call it. So the specialist that deals with these situations, Parkinson's and things that are related, which this is related. It's much more aggressive and not treatable. I'm learning that this is the situation, and I'm kind of the poster child given my symptoms. I'm exactly what they're telling me it is. I'm lining up completely. I have luckily kept a good sense of humor. You talked earlier about keeping some humor in the situation. If I can't have a sense of humor, I don't do. I spent the first year really kind of in denial. I could still move pretty well, and I was working, had some of the best years of my career those last couple of years. Put my head down and worked and didn't do much about it until it progressed and became something that I couldn't ignore any longer.
You have a therapist or someone that's sort of trained to help you psychologically move through this from day to day. Talk a little bit about that support network because, Dawn, you're one of the most networked people I know. You have invested so much into this community in West Seattle for so many years, and we're going to get to that in a minute. But let's just talk about support for you. What does that look like on a day to day basis?
I'm blessed to be surrounded by a group of incredible friends, and really am taking stock lately and not taking for granted that that is just by chance. I have curated this group of people by being a good friend. So I'm really starting to own that I've surrounded myself with these few people because of my relationship with them. I have my best friend of 33 years and his husband, and I purchased a house last year with a basement or a lower level mother in law, ADU. So they live in the same house with me, which is wonderful. We joke they're always listening for the clunk, they're listening for me to fall.
Oh dear. Okay.
But they're here for both the daily support and for socialization and moral support and what have you. And then I have some other very, very close friends. A very close friend of mine is my medical power of attorney and goes with me to all my doctor's appointments and has been to the Mayo Clinic with me 3 times. And she's just a lifesaver. I'm blown away by the generosity of these people. They don't need to be dealing with this, and they are.
Listening for the clunk. You are definitely keeping your sense of humor
Right.
through this. Good for
Right.
you. So, Dawn, let's talk a little bit about this has brought you in its progression to the place where you're no longer selling real estate. Is that correct?
That's correct. I had a really robust 22-year career that needed to come
Yeah.
to a halt. I had a wonderful time doing it. In my last listing, I just thought I'm avoiding going up the stairs and down the stairs, and I can't do that. I need to be comfortable and not put myself in danger. I called it quits last November. I sent out a letter early this year to clients, and it was really, really hard leading up to that. But once I did it, I felt a huge sense of relief and got amazing responses from clients. Clients I would have never imagined would respond were wonderful.
It's so funny how that works, right? In our line of work, that sometimes we have people that really don't give us the time of day and you think don't care at all and are really stoic. And then all of a sudden something like this happens and they're the most gracious, kind, overflowing with generosity people. And you thought, really? Where were you for the last 22 years? But
Right.
glad you're showing up now. That's great. So, Don, let's talk a little bit about your investment in this community, if you will. I'm going to say some things I know, but I know that I'm scratching the surface of what you've done over the years. We were both a part of an organization called Business Networking International, BNI, short for BNI. And you started that chapter, I believe, in West Seattle.
It's a kind of a funny story how this came about. So I was at a point in my career where it was year 2 and this had to work. It had to work. I was up against an early out contract with my previous job at American Airlines as a flight attendant and instructor. I was faced with taking this early out and really, really cutting the cord to that security. I was brainstorming with my broker at the time ideas to try and drum up some business. And she said, you should go door to door, knock on doors. And I thought, how horrible would that be? I just bought a new house, so I thought that's a great reason to meet the neighbors. So I at least can go around my block and introduce myself to people. So I chose Tuesday at 10 a.m., hoping no one would be home. Everybody would be at work. And I knocked on doors, and the few people that were home, I introduced myself. If there was no answer at the door, I left a bag of microwave popcorn with a note that said, just pop by to introduce myself. So one of
Nice.
my neighbors, a couple doors down, called me up and said, I love your marketing. It's obviously obvious that you're trying to build your business. Have coffee with me. So I did. And she told me about BNI. At that time, BNI was pretty new in our region. There were just a handful of chapters around the region, and it was also privately owned. It was a franchise. So they were starting to want to build the area. And there was already a chapter in West Seattle. BNI, as you know, is different in that it allows one member per profession per chapter. So you've got your one real estate agent, your one mortgage broker, your one chiropractor, your one massage therapist. Every chapter in the world already has a real estate broker because it's very lucrative group
Yep.
for agents. I started up chartered a new chapter. It took us 10 months to get the required number of 14 people to make an actual chapter. And we did it for 21 years. Every Wednesday morning, I
Wow.
went to my BNI meeting. Unless I was on vacation or sick, I was at BNI. And it's one of the most
Wow.
amazing organizations that I've ever been a part of. The relationships there, I still am dear, dear friends with many people in that chapter. And that chapter built my business. There were years when that was 50% of my business. And not only was it coming to me, I had so many relationships and so many connections that I was really valuable to my clients because I could connect them with a dentist, I could connect them with a home inspector, I could connect them with a dog walker, anything.
BNI is a great way to build your business. Not only do you get referrals from it, right? They begin to trust you and you see them every week. But then, like you said, your ability to be a referral source to your clients, like out of the blue stuff where they're just like, wait a minute, by the way, do you happen to know a good person who does hair? And you're like, actually,
I do.
I do, right?
Uh,
And here's their connection. So that's BNI. Let's talk a little bit about Arts West. You have been a part of that organization and a huge supporter in different capacities for that. So tell us a little bit about that.
Arts West is an incredible gym that we have here in West Seattle. It's a regional theater that over the years that I've been involved has grown into an absolutely amazing place. I was on the board of directors at Arts West starting in 2007 and was there through some very pivotal times in the organization. Hired and unfortunately had to dismiss several executive directors, a couple of executive directors and artistic directors over the years. And now it's so stable, and I'm so proud of what it is. So I was an active board member for 9 years and then was voted in as an emeritus board member. And I always think of emeritus board members as either older or extremely wealthy, which I'm neither. It was fun to be part of the it's fun to be an emeritus group. So I'm not voting, but very active and interested in the organization, involved.
I wrote this down, Don, and I'm not even sure it's correct, but is there an affiliation with the Chamber, West Seattle Chamber, and you as well?
Yes, I joined the Chamber of Commerce in 2004 when I joined in 2002 when I was also getting BNI running and all of that. Involved myself as much as I could in the community. And then sat on the board of directors for 6 years back then, did my 6-year stint, then took a break. And then now I'm finishing up another 6-year stint of board of directors. This year I'm serving as immediate past president, my last year on the board. Also very proud to be a part of the West Seattle Chamber of Commerce. It's a fantastic organization.
Not only that, I'm sure there's more, and I want to ask you that, but you were a part of the West Seattle Windermere office for real estate for 20 years, 18 years, something like that. You recently moved to another firm, but you were there at that office for many, many years. One of my friends, Marin Costa, just ran for city council for the district that had to do with West Seattle, that West Seattle was in. And she said to me, I'd really like you to host something at your house, and I need to know who the players are in West Seattle. And I said, well, I know a player right now. Without even thinking, I immediately said, well, you got to meet Don Leverett. If you say West Seattle and you say real estate or someone that's connected in West Seattle, you're going to say Don Leverett next. You came to my house, as you remember, to hear from Marin Costa, and that was really cool. Tell us a little bit about your real estate career of 22 years.
Well, 22 years, I told you how the first year went. First year, I made $16,000, and one of those was selling my own home. But in year 2, it started taking off, and I built the business through community, through relationships, and it's really how I worked. I was never a person with a great database or a super system of doing things systematically and generating business that way. It was all done through referrals and through relationships and through growing those relationships and being valuable to folks. I was blessed with the 22 years, 20 of them at Windermere, and then moving on. Absolutely blessed and feel so fortunate to have been allowed to be a part of so many people's lives at pivotal points and making changes, growing families, losing families, what have you. So honored.
I remember Dawn went out of town once to Paris. I felt really like a huge compliment. She said, can you watch my business while I'm gone in Paris? And I said, sure. And of course, these clients that she'd been working with for years or whatever ended up buying a house or something. And I got to help them. I don't know if I've ever told you this, Dawn, but they just sang your praises. And it warmed my heart to hear, we know our agents in Paris and we know you're the substitute, right? Okay, we'll handle you. But boy, we love Dawn, and she has served us so well for all these years. So, and I know that is the sentiment of so many, if not all of your clients. So you've done a great job. I'm going to say this out loud. It seems a little trite to talk about real estate for a minute, but if you're up for it, part of this podcast is about real estate. And so there's listeners on here who are brand new in the industry and some that have been doing this longer than you and I. Is there any advice that you would give people about, other than what you've already said, which you could expand on more if you want, to say this is how to build a strong real estate career? Because you had an incredible career, and I'd love to hear some of your success stories.
Well, this is where I'm not really sure what I have to offer, but I just think that being honest, working hard, and really connecting with people is the most important part of this business. Being a good human being. Never lose sight of the fact that these folks are doing one of the biggest things, most important things they'll do in their lifetime. biggest financial and emotional decisions. Connecting is that's sorry that I don't have a lot. Like I said, I didn't never have the big fancy database or careers or a client management system, but
I've interviewed so many high producers just like Dawn over these last 2 years on this podcast. And it's interesting that she downplays probably the most important thing that we do in this business. Dawn's not some flashy, pull out her, 18-page business plan or here's all my systems. That's not Dawn. But ask her to have a conversation with anyone and she can do it in a minute. And that sort of connection piece about really truly saying human to human, I want to help you get where you want to go is what makes you you and what makes you've had such a successful career. It's funny that you say, I don't really know what to say and I don't really know what to bring to the table. And yet, right, the very thing that you're talking about is the crux of it. And you're not the only high producer that has said that over these 2 years of interviews. So listeners, pay attention. So Don, let's go back just a little bit. I want to start talking a little bit. You've got family in Texas. You're from Texas. Is that right?
correct.
And you were in some pageant of some kind in Texas, if I remember correctly.
You're right. It's embarrassing. I'm not
No.
not at proud of it now, but yes, I was in Miss
Oh, no,
Texas
no.
USA pageant years ago.
Hey, be proud of it. That's cool.
Okay.
And you've got family, I'm sure, coming up and visiting you and hanging around as additional support for yourself. Just before we finish up, because this is already probably taxing you a fair amount, what's a day in your life look like now?
I've taken up crochet, so there's a lot of
Wow. All
crocheting,
right.
plowing through books, and really just taking stock of relationships. I'm kind of taking inventory of my life, what I have done. I've spent so much time grieving what I can't do anymore. 4 years ago, I was swinging a golf club and paddleboarding, and my friend and I had a hashtag LVED, little vacation every day. So we'd pop out and go swimming or something just to feel like we're on vacation every day and try to get some balance in life. I spent a lot of time grieving that stuff. So now I'm trying to really take a look at what I have done, what I can be proud of, and what I can say I did, checked it off. I never really had a bucket list, so now I'm doing the reverse bucket list.
I love that. The reverse bucket list. That's so cool. Again, I started off this interview by saying that I'm just so impressed that you are willing to be as vulnerable about what's happening in your life right now. And the comment that you just made is just more evidence of that, to say that you've been grieving. You've grieved a lot, and I'm sure there's still more grieving to come about what you can and cannot do anymore. And as this disease progresses, but that you're also stepping out of that grief, hopefully more often, to find what's amazing about your life still. And that's the people,
Mhm.
that's the relationships in your life,
It's true.
despite what's happening. So you're crocheting a lot. You're having some visitors coming by. Your friends are obviously there a lot.
Yes.
Anything else? Anything
A
else?
weekend of culture. I went to the symphony on Friday night and the opera on Sunday, and so I'm learning about the ADA seats in theaters
Oh,
and
yeah.
how to access those, and really having a good different look at the world from an ADA standpoint, something I never really
I bet.
certainly paid attention to, but not from this perspective.
For our listeners' sake, that's because you are primarily in a wheelchair if you're moving around, is that reality?
I'm using a walker 100% of the time, and I
Okay.
just got a
Okay.
portable wheelchair that we're taking to places like the symphony and the opera and museums and more anywhere. My doctor talks about the economy of the trip. If you're going to get there easier and if you're going to enjoy yourself more, make it easy on yourself. So I'm trying to. And a friend of mine, her wife passed away recently, and I inherited her scooter. So I have a little scooter that's
Okay.
fun. She called it, they used it for
Okay.
Costco and casinos.
Okay. Okay.
Trying to implement that from time to time, go see the troll in Lincoln Park and things like that.
If I remember correctly, Don, you had a scooter riding on your scooter. So you've just replaced it with this scooter. Now you're on a different scooter.
Yeah, I had a Vespa, a white Vespa, and her name was Blanca. And so now I walk her as white,
Oh,
and her name is Blanca too.
I love it. Blanca. We got a new Blanca in town. I love it. There's people that are going to be on this call that don't know you, that are somewhere else in Washington state that don't know who Don Leverett is. And what is it that you hope that they take away from today's talk on the show?
Primarily, I wanted to get the awareness of this crazy disease out. It's so rare and with no cause and no cure. And I just wanted to make people aware because, as we talked about early in the show, we didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about it. And most medical professionals don't know anything about it. For people to just be aware that it's out there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then there's a whole bunch of people that are going to be listening to the show, some of which will learn for the first time about your diagnosis. There's going to be some outpouring of, I'm sure, shock and grief along with you, and then wanting to sort of reach out. So how do they do that? What's the best way for you? I'm sure there are some days that are easier than others, and not wanting to kind of rush you with a bunch of people. So give us some direction in that regard.
Well, certainly a text or an email is wonderful.
Okay.
I'm really feeling freed up when it comes to email. I'm not checking it all the time like we do as real estate brokers. So, but every few days I check my email. I definitely have my phone on me. So reach out if you want to. It's great to be connected, still be connected, feel like I'm part of the world out there.
And I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but is there a place to give money if people want to do that for research for this particular disease?
There is. There's a website called MSA Coalition.
Okay.
That's a foundation that accepts donations. That would be great.
Okay.
That's sweet. Thank you, Jim.
Okay. I'm going to end this with this last question. It might be a tough question as well, and you've been wonderful in answering all these questions. Thank you. How do you, as you go about your everyday, find hope in the midst of a terminal diagnosis and sort of waiting every day for what new is going to go wrong? How do you do that, Dawn? That's a personal question from me.
That's a good question. I take stock of what I have done and who I do have. I'm having great conversations with some friends about what's out there, what's next, because sometimes I do feel like I'm sitting and waiting, just waiting. And so that's kind of scary. I'm open to all different, I mean, I don't have any personal, very strong beliefs, so I'm open to hearing a lot about a lot of things right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Is there anything else before we end the call today that you want to say?
Just connect with each other, and give people space to be themselves and connect.
Don, I've said this a couple times already, but I'm going to say it again. Super brave and vulnerable and generous with your time in coming on the show today and talking to us about what's really very personally happening in your life. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening into Pocket Hours. I hope this has been interesting, fun, made you laugh, made you think, spurred you on to do and implement some new things in your business. I appreciate your time and hope this has been a good use of it, period. Now, go be the agent you would hire.